Hey guys, what is up? It is Kevin. Welcome to another one of my tutorials. So it's not a tutorial, it's really more tips than anything. Today, I'm going to show you some tips on how to get your vocal to sit out front in your mix. Sometimes we struggle with where vocals should lay in a mix. I'm going to show you a couple of techniques that's going to really, hopefully, align that up for you and clear up some questions. So without further ado, let's go. All right. So today we're going to be talking about some things to make your vocal really stand out in the mix. So if you're watching on YouTube, drop a like on there, subscribe so you won't miss any more of these little tutorials that I'm putting out. I really think this is going to be helpful today. Okay, so let's get right to it. You're mixing a vocal and you don't know where to put it in the mix. Is it too loud, too hot? Is it getting lost in certain places? So tip number one is going to be a tip I'm sure you have heard before, but I can't really emphasize it enough. And that's to mix at a lower volume. A volume so low, not that you can't hear details, you want to hear details, but what you want to do is eliminate the things that a room is doing to a vocal. Sometimes rooms are brighter and they'll make you mix the vocal a little duller because the room is brighter. And if you bring down the volume, you can hear it's like pixelating a mix, right? It's like when you turn the volume down, when you look at a picture and you pixelate a picture, the tiny pixels turn into bigger pixels, right? And then when you can still recognize what it is, I don't know if that's a great example or not, but when you can still recognize what it is, you've still got a good picture. When you lower the volume on a mix, your mix kind of becomes pixelated and you start to hear what's actually important in the mix. Can you hear the snare? Can you hear the kick drum? Can you hear the bass? Can you hear the instruments that are filling? Can you do that? So when you pull down a volume, you start to hear what's really important in a mix. And if you're mixing this kind of music, like a lyric-driven music where you want to understand the words to everything, then bring the mix down so that you can hear those things. So here's a first little bonus tip is to mix the vocal. Don't be afraid to mix the vocal too low to begin with. The reason I say that is that once you get the vocal to be at the right volume in respect to the music, then you have liberty of bringing it up or bringing it down in comparison to that. But what you want to do is to be able to ride the vocal in respect to the music, right? Then you've got a good solid vocal ride where you're not losing certain words, you're getting little riffs that you want to hear, you're adding all of that stuff in, and then relative to the music, it's right. And now you can either raise the volume of the vocal or you can lower the volume of the vocal. But the trick here, when you mix the vocal too low and then bring it up, is that you're making the vocal ride with the music the way it is currently. And another little bonus tip here, and I can't stress this enough, I mix 80% of what I do in mono. And what that does is it not only lower volume and in mono, because what that does is it makes you concentrate on what is absolutely important in the mix, and it kind of like gives you x-ray vision as to what might be competing with that when the mix is in stereo or in mono. If you don't think mono is significant, it is. Because if you mix if you ever listen to a song, let's just say in another room, that mix is not coming through the door and into the next room in stereo. It's coming in mono. So any cancellation that's going to happen will have happened already. So it's not that you want to make your mix mono. You just want to make it compatible in mono. So going back to that, mix low and mix in mono, and then mix your vocal too low. Because if you mix it too low and it's just barely surviving above the mix, then it will survive at that level. but it will also survive at a louder level. And you won't get big phrases that are too loud, because what people do when they hear a loud phrase is that they will make, especially inexperienced ears, and even experienced ears will do this. When they hear a phrase that's too loud, they're not going to usually say that one phrase is too loud, or that one word in that one phrase is too loud. They're going to say the vocals are too loud right there, or their vocals are too loud, period. And then you have to, another tip I'm going to give you a little later, you have to figure out if they meant that or not, right? So if you mix at a low volume and in mono, and you mix the vocal too low to where it's just barely hanging on, and then you raise the volume of it, then you've got the best chance of having a vocal that's going to be a good ride all the way through. Okay, so another thing you can do too is use the attack principle. When you're mixing low like that, and you can hear most of a phrase, but you can't understand the one word that came in, then raise the level of that word. It's called the attack principle. Your ears will tend to deceive you into believing that something is not loud enough just because it didn't catch the first word, right? So like, for instance, have you ever been in a conversation and you understood everything except the last word, and then you understood everything but the last word, and then when you said, "What did you say?" they'll just repeat the last word, right? They don't, and that's not what you necessarily what you need to hear. Sometimes you didn't understand what they said in the beginning, and then when you say, "What did you say?" they'll repeat the last word, right? That's not necessarily what you need, because what you need is context, right? So mixing vocals is the same way. When you're mixing vocals and you're mixing at a low level and you can't understand the first word, it's called the primacy effect. And if you can't hear what's coming in, then your ear never really is satisfied to say that vocal is loud enough. So use the attack principle. Just bring the attack up, or bring the first couple of words up, or maybe even the first syllable of the first word. Sometimes that's all it'll take to make it understandable. Okay, so mix tip number 2 to get your vocals up, or to make your vocals ride in a mix well, is to use creative compression. I've done this before, where I've taken a stack of compressors, where I've taken, here's just one of the tips. If you use a stack of compressors, in other words, if you were to take an LA2A and then an 1176 right after that, and neither one of those compressors are doing a lot of work, right? What you'll do is both compressors will treat those loud phrases more gently, and it won't clamp down on the mix, and you won't have to worry so much about such a long release time recovery. And it won't, sometimes if you put too much compression on the vocal, you tend to get those louder phrases down. But sometimes if the phrase right after a loud phrase is not loud enough, then you've created another problem in a different place, right? So sometimes if you use 2 compressors, let's just say even 2 1176s or 2 LA2As, and neither one of them are doing a ton of work, then your recovery time is not as much, and your intelligibility of the vocal are increased. So here's one bonus tip I've used before. If you really want to get scientific with it, one of the things you can do is put an 1176 or an LA2A on the vocal, and then watch that vocal. And when it starts to compress, then go to the clip gain, go to that wave file, and decrease the volume of that to where it's not hitting the compressor anymore, right? And what does that do is that just helps your compressor to work a little less, a little more seamlessly. It's not doing quite as much work, so you can compress everything a little bit more and not have to worry about those loud phrases popping through and changing the sound of your vocal. So use compressor stacks, use stacks of compressors, or you can use your compressor gain reduction, or how much it's compressing a signal, to trigger you as to how much you should decrease the volume going into the compressor. Okay, I know it's kind of a roundabout way of doing things, but I've used this before when I really had a lot of time to mix, and this is definitely a good way to do that. So use creative compression when you're trying to get your vocal to sit in the mix, by stacking compressors, or using your compressor to tell you how much to clip gain your vocal down. Okay, so This is point number 3, the last point. So if you have any questions, be sure and pop them in the comments. Or if you're watching this later or listening later, go to this post and just comment in the comment section, and I'll be glad to either do a follow-up video of this or answer your questions live. Okay. Okay. So the last question is, or the last thing that's going to help you to get your vocal to sit in the mix right, is to ask the question behind the question sometimes. Now, I've had this happen before where somebody was saying that vocal is too loud, and I knew that the vocal wasn't too loud, and we covered in the last point that you can actually you can lower the volume of one syllable or one consonant of the vocal, and it will trick your ears into thinking that it is loud enough, right? Well, another question is it a head? Is the vocal a head? That's what's making it seem louder? Sometimes I have noticed that when I'm recording orchestras, that a lot of times the string sections will play a head and sharp on purpose just to make themselves a little louder. I've noticed that string sections tune a little louder, tune a little higher. Like if it's 440 as a standard, sometimes they'll tune to 441, 442, just to get that brightness that you get from being sharp. So sometimes your vocal is a little sharp, and that's making it seem loud. And sometimes it's a little ahead, and that's making it seem loud. I was mixing some bluegrass music a little while ago, and the banjo player was saying my banjo's not loud enough, and I knew it was really loud. And what I had found out is that he was playing ahead of the beat on purpose because he wanted to be featured, or he wanted to see. Well, I don't think he knew exactly kind of the science behind it, but it's the attack principle again, right? If you hear it first, then your ear is saying that's loud, that's plenty loud enough. And sometimes if you want something to be louder and it's not being loud, then nudge it ahead a little bit. But sometimes if they're saying it's too loud, sometimes it may be ahead, and you may need to pull it back into the pocket, or even make it late sometimes. That will make it seem like it's not as loud. So check the timing and pitch. It may not be the volume at all. It could be that it's ahead or sharp, or flat, even, that they don't like. If they don't like the note and they think it's too loud, sometimes it's not what you think it is at all. So always ask the question behind the question. As we develop as engineers, and as we figure out how this art and science of mixing, sometimes we know that it's not necessarily the issue is not the issue, right? Sometimes they're saying that they don't like the vocal, and sometimes it's just because it's out of pitch. So anyway, okay, I'm going to go over here and see if there are any questions to ask. In the meantime, I've got a free resource for you. It's at mixcoach.com/checklist. It'll be in the show notes of this in the comment section. So check that. It's my 7-point checklist that I do on every mix that I do. It's full of good information that I think will help you. So go and grab it, mixcoach.com/checklist. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to leave that up, and let's go to the comments. Hey, James, that's a great question. James says, hey, I have a question. Are you a big multi-band guy for vocals? It's funny, James, I was just talking about this yesterday to a more advanced mixer, and he was asking me if I use multi-band for vocals. I use multi-band for two different occasions, and that is this. I use EQ to filter things, but sometimes if you filter too much and you have plosives in the mic and the mic is popping, sometimes I will take a band that is that the plosives are in, and I will compress it. Sometimes with dynamic mics, when you're close to it, you just hear too much of that low end thing from just air hitting the diaphragm of the microphone. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll put a multi-band EQ on that section where I can just pull the plosives down. The second way that I use multi-band compression or EQ on the vocals is if I'm trying to get more brightness out of the vocals, but I don't want to intensify the sibilance of a vocal. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll add a shelf, and I'll use the output gain of the compressor as like an EQ. but what it is I'm trying to contain the top end so that shelf that I'm adding of EQ, which is actually the output or the makeup gain of that compression band, and then I'll I'll make sure that it's contained, that it's well compressed, so that when I add it, it's adding it overall and it's not intensifying the sibilance. So that's how I use a multiband. Hopefully that's helpful, James. By the way, I've heard some of your mixes lately, man. They sound really good. So anyway, okay. So, hey, thanks for coming today, everybody. Again, I've got a resource for you, mixcoach.com/checklist. There's a lot of hopefully helpful things in there for you. And until we meet again, I will see you next week. And thanks for coming. Okay. Talk to you soon. Bye.